I think God saw the perfect storm. I'm Mignery. I was born and reared on a cattle ranch in Nebraska, central Nebraska, and I now live in Loveland, Colorado, with my wife Sherry, and we've been here since 1981, and we moved here for the reason to get a little bit closer to the foundries where we do our bronze castings, and which we didn't have that facility in Nebraska. Otherwise, we probably would still be living there. My family were off and on Methodists, and so I was, of course, reared in that church. And when I met my wife Sherry, I had always been what I consider a sidewalk Catholic. I was always one of these people that stood on the sidewalk outside the church and thought, you know, I think there's something in there for me. But I've never really made an attempt to join the church until I was out of the Army. And when I met my wife Sherry, she was Catholic, and she did not make any effort to convert me, but she did say, you just choose to do what you choose to, whatever you choose to do. But obviously that was my great opportunity to give the church a chance. After my instructions, my confirmation, my wife's parents were witnesses, and I being off and on Methodist, I had no idea, no concept of saints. I mean, it just wasn't part of my life and had never had been. And so when Father Keneally asked me to select a saint, I was baffled and I was embarrassed. I thought, wow, right here in front of my wife's parents and everything, but all at once this voice, very distinct voice, came to my head, and it said Saint Michael. And I had not really had any association with the term Saint Michael, the name Saint Michael, but the voice was obviously there, and it was clear as a bell. And so, of course, I repeated that, and that got me out of that dilemma. And ever since then, all my life since then, I had really wondered why that voice was there. What does St. Michael have to do with me? That feeling stayed with me until this miracle happened in 1998. The statue of St. Michael was originally commissioned by a church in Hastings, Nebraska. And I felt that I needed to take a little different approach to St. Michael than what I had seen. For one thing, all of the traditional representations of St. Michael from Europe and so forth portrayed him as somewhat more effeminate than I preferred to have him. And not that I have anything against that, but it's just the idea that I didn't feel that it fit for my image of St. Michael. And so I decided to portray him as a little bit more of a masculine, lantern-jawed type of personality. And there was something about the static versions that I had been watching, traditional versions too, just having him standing there with his foot on the demons and so forth, and sword raised. And so I thought I'd take a little different approach, and a little more action, a little bit more movement. And so consequently I had him suspended in midair and have him just a little bit more dramatic. Up till that point, my profession with portraying cowboy and Western art called in the most part for action and for dramatic action, like bucking horses and so forth. And so that kind of became my style of putting a lot of movement and a lot of action, sometime a little brutal action, I guess, maybe, possibly, but at least all of my work gravitated around more of a piece emanating of movement and action. And so I decided to make the same approach to St. Michael. Now, after my production of the piece, I had it finished in clay, and all 4 feet tall. I had it just exactly the way I wanted it, but I started and I had it totally finished in clay, ready to go to the foundry for casting. But I kept thinking, this nagging thought in my mind, that is this a little too violent? Is it portrayed a little too violently for people to pray alongside of it? Should I maybe have him standing more benignly with his wings just down vertically and in a more peaceful position? And I debated and debated for about a week. And finally I made the decision that I'm going to have to tear it down. I'm going to have to start all over again. I can't present the church with something that I feel they maybe would not have wanted. And I came in that morning. Now, to backtrack a bit, we use cans of foam. They're about the size of a shaving can. They're used for insulation in walls, strictly for carpenter's use. And we use those to fill in and make masks, and as to fill out the armature, because it hardens, dries, and it can be carved and then covered with clay. So we do, most artists use a lot of that just to make some formations, and that can be hardened overnight, and then, actually they harden quicker than that. And so this can of foam that I had been using, I had some minor little changes at the base of St. Michael's sculpture. And I made some changes on the base of it, and then used the foam can to blow in some more foam to let it set for a bit, and then I could cover that with clay. And I sat the foam can down underneath the sculpture that night and went home. The next morning I came in strictly with the idea that I think maybe I'm going to have to tear it down. And I looked down, and the foam can had emptied itself, totally emptied itself, which in itself is an impossibility. Because I think any carpenter, and I've interviewed numbers of carpenters that have used thousands of these cans, and as well as I've used quite a number of them, but not a one of them has ever had one empty itself, because it hardens immediately, that it restricts any further growth of the foam can coming out of the spout. So I looked at that and I thought, oh brother, we've lost a whole can of foam, and I commented that to my assistant. And me being at an angle a little differently than hers, I didn't exactly see the miracle instantly. All I saw was the foam can piled up underneath the can. And this can was sitting directly under the clay sculpture that I had just created. And my assistant, Cynthia, said, wait a minute. She said, before you pick that up, look at it. And I did, and all at once it was there. The miracle was there. And I thought to myself, this is no way. I mean, this can't happen. And it was kind of the talk of the neighborhood for a while. And I think I had some doubters, obviously. And but I had a lot of them that were just said, that's an affirmation. And so we have a lot of believers and a lot of doubters. But in the meantime, in my mind, I know that the possibility of this being serendipity or just happenstance is so remote that there absolutely is no way that this could not be termed as a miracle. second part of the miracle happened when Father Rocco traveled around Europe looking for a design of St. Michael that he would like to have done for the front of his church in a monument form. And he relayed later that he traveled around Europe looking for one, didn't find one. And he was back in Fort Collins at Elizabeth Ann Seton Church, whereas we had donated one to them, a 4-foot version of it. And he saw that, and he came to Luke Hecker, who was the head of the foundation, and mentioned that he'd found it but didn't know the artist. Well, Luke and his wife and Sherry and I have been friends for years. And of course, Luke figured out then who it was, contacted me, and from then on it was primarily done between Luke and I. And fortunately, there was a host came forth to finance the foundry costs of the piece. And of course, I was very willing to donate my time, obviously, because for the man, both men. And I just know that, and it might be some question as to who actually did the foam. Was it St. Michael or was it God himself? But I think I have it in my mind that God gave St. Michael the permission to go ahead and do it, and blessings. And I like to express that this miracle has nothing to do with my talent, the level of my talent, or my status as an artist. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything in the world to do with St. Michael and the Lord. But I think this happened because I think God saw the perfect storm. He saw the sculpture of St. Michael. He saw the can of foam, which you might say is a carpenter's tool. And he saw it placed underneath the statue. And I think God and St. Michael felt that this is one way I think that we can leave a positive, an obvious symbol of his existence without actually leaving fingerprints. And there's obviously no fingerprints involved. It's strictly that the can of foam was exploded by spiritual means. And I don't consider it my creation, and that's the reason that Sherry and I decided to hand over all of the rights and of reproduction, all of the rights of everything to the church, because we both felt that this was done by God and it should be owned by God.